The Candid Frame is supported by donations by listeners just like you. Help us to bring you great conversations with great photographers. Support the show today with your monthly contribution through our Patreon effort at patreon.com/The Candid Frame, or click on the link in the show notes or the website at thecandidframe.com. Thank you.
This is Ibadian X, and this is The Candid Frame. Happy New Year, and welcome to a new season of The Candid Frame. This will be our 11th season, and I'm really excited about the many conversations we're going to share with you this year. You've got a lot to look forward to. And as proud as I am about the work that we do here, I know that there are so many out there that have never heard of The Candid Frame, and as a result are missing out on some of the great conversations we've had with photographers like Mary Ellen Mark, Dan Winters, Joel Meyerowitz, and so many others. The insight and the inspiration that these conversations bring means a lot to me, and I hope that it's meant a lot to you too, over whatever period of time that you've been listening to this show. If so, I'd like to solicit your help in spreading the word by using your own social networks, be it Twitter, Facebook, or Google+. It can be as easy as just following me on Twitter or Facebook and just resharing my announcements of new episodes as they're released. Or you can just comment on an episode that you like and share it with others by using the hashtag CandidFrame. I'll have links to our various social networks in the show notes. You know, we don't spend a lot of time talking about gear and tech on this show, and so an audience is not naturally drawn to us. But it's people like you, sharing your passion for what we do, that will make that difference and help us take TCF to even greater heights in 2017. And to lead off the season, I'm pleased to share a conversation with photographer Mark Bennington. He's a portrait photographer based out of New York, whose new book is Living the Dream, and it provides a behind-the-scenes look at the world of the movie industry in India. It's yet another example of how photographs reveal and share a way of life that most of us will never know and experience. Mark is a big proponent of personal projects, as you'll see when you visit his website and you hear the interview. And as you begin your own photographic year, I hope you'll remember that you have the opportunity to share images and stories that can and will reveal the unique, the beautiful, the surprising things that make our world today an amazing place to live in. All right. Well, Mark, welcome to The Candid Frame. It's a real pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be here.
And you're a very busy photographer, but I'm really sort of amazed at how persistent you are in terms of your personal projects, two of which we're going to be talking about today. But why don't you tell us a little bit about how you sort of segued into photography, because you had other careers before you became a full-time photographer.
Yeah, I mean, I was an actor for about 10 years in New York, trained in New York, lived here for 6 years in the early 90s. And then I was in Los Angeles for 16 years ultimately, but the first 4 or 5 of those years I was an actor and doing a lot of theater. I mean, I did a lot of regional theater and Shakespeare, and then got into, finally got a good agent and a good manager and started getting more auditions for film and TV and started doing a lot of TV roles. And then that sort of, in the early part of 2000, 2001, 2002, that started to, I was going through a big shift in my life. I just turned 33 and had been in a long-term relationship and had left that relationship. So there's the major things in my life were starting to shift. And I was auditioning a lot, not booking. It was like one of those periods where, you can't get arrested.
Yeah.
So I started to think about, other things I could possibly do. And my grandfather had been an avid amateur photographer for years and had always wanted me to get into it so that he and I could sort of share this dialogue. And he passed away in 96, but he had left me all of his cameras and lenses. So I had all of this stuff lying around. In fact, one day I was I was living in this new place, and I was sort of in the fetal position, and I looked up, and I was, I had tears running down my eyes, and I saw this camera, and I thought, well, maybe I could, take headshots of my friends, until I figure out, what I'm going to do with my life. That started this whole new journey for me. I did take some headshots of my friends, in fact, all my friends, and put a book together and took it into Cunningham, my commercial agent at the time. They kind of flipped out. They were like, wow, Mark, we didn't know you could shoot. I said, yeah, of course. And they started sending me a few people almost overnight. I mean, within the first, 6 months of shooting, I was suddenly making a living doing it. In fact, that first year, they sent me about 300 people.
Oh, wow.
So that really, really was a life changer. And it suddenly felt like, for me, I had been, a fish swimming upstream and had turned around and now was going downstream. Everything just sort of seemed to be working, and so much so that, my life has been so much about serendipity, and sort of that's really how things have happened for me. Yeah. And maybe that's true for a lot of people, but certainly for me, I remember I had, right at the day, almost the week I got my cards that said, photographer, I met with this woman who, long story, she was a creative director working on this Navy project. I had just started shooting headshots, and as I was making money doing this, I thought to myself, I should probably go back to school and actually learn the craft. So I was taking a class at Santa Monica Community College. I went to my teacher. I said, hey, this woman who works for the Navy, I've been in touch with her, and she asked me to send her some stuff about this possible project. And he said, well, it looks like you're way in over your head, but what I would do is, do a couple of sample shoots, send those to her. And anyway, so that's what I did. Ended up booking this job for the Navy, and that sort of set me on a whole new course. Yeah,
that serendipity is wild, especially the way you tell the story in your book about how the whole project sort of got started. Tell us about that, about how you eventually, went on a trip to India with sort of this germ of an idea, and how serendipity sort of helped that to happen.
The whole thing started with at Look 3. I don't know have you been to Look 3?
No.
In Charlottesville. I had just to back up a couple of years, I was on this trip, again, serendipity. I was on this trip to Italy a couple of years before, and was going through this I was totally lost in Montepulciano, and met this person who knew David Allen Harvey, who I'd never heard of.
Oh, okay.
And so anyway, I just happened to be in this small town. I meet Dave Harvey and all of these guys at Seven, and so I struck up this relationship with Harvey. Anyway, cut to a couple of years later, I was at Look 3, and so he and I were talking. He was saying, if you really want to get into this as a second career, you should do a book. Like that's what you really need to do. And anyone who knows him knows that he's hot on, everyone developing their own projects and book projects and stuff like that. So that's how that started. He said, I think you really should do a book on actors in Los Angeles, since you were one, so many actors, and there's not been an honest to God, documentary book on actors in Los Angeles. And I said, well, that sounds like a good idea, but I'm thinking like I'd like to do a book on feet. And he said, feet? He was like, what are you talking about, kid? I don't get it. Anyway, so I started working on this other project called the Foot Book, which is out there somewhere. But I kind of started doing this project in Los Angeles, which turned out to go nowhere because I couldn't get in any doors. And then I went to India. I go to India in 2010, sort of on this sojourn. I had just turned 40. I was looking for something different, I don't know what I was looking for, but I wanted to get out of Los Angeles and out of the country and find something else. And then as I was there, I thought, well, maybe I could go to Bombay and maybe I could meet some actors. And that's where, I was supposed to, when I arrived in Bombay, after traveling up in northern India for about 4 weeks, I went to Bombay, was supposed to stay with a good friend's real estate agent's brother when I got there. And as soon as I got there, I called him and he said, I'm so sorry you can't stay. My father's sick. You have to find another place. Again, like totally stop me if I'm...
No, keep going. You're good.
I'm the king of tangents. So I go on Craigslist Bombay, or Craigslist Mumbai, I should say. And the only thing that I knew about Bollywood and even approaching the subject was people told me that you have to go to Bandra. This word Bandra stuck out in my mind because that's where all the actors lived. So I look up on Craigslist Mumbai, and the first thing that comes up is rent a room in my apartment in Bandra. And I thought, that's a sign. And so I go there, and as soon as I go there, this woman who is an American who's staying in the room next to me, turns out, long story, she and I are born in the same hospital in Boone County, Missouri. And so she asked me what I'm doing there, and I tell her that I'm starting this project. And at this point, I'm just sort of creating this project in my head, and I'm just talking about it as if it exists, saying that I'm working on an article, juxtaposing the acting communities of Hollywood and Bollywood for Rolling Stone, which was almost completely made up. I did know some people at Rolling Stone, and they said, if there's a thing, we could be interested. But I was just approaching it as if it were a done deal. And in any case, I asked her what she did, and she said, I'm a professional catalyst. And I said, well, what does that mean? What do you actually do? And she said, I make things happen.
I love that.
Great. Yeah. I said, okay, great. That's great. And a few days later, then she called me and she said, hey, I'm having lunch with this lawyer who represents some Bollywood people. You should, pitch him your idea. And I met my now friend Jamshed, and we spoke for 4 hours about everything except for the project. And then the last 10 minutes of our conversation, I told him about the project. He said, sure, call me tomorrow and we'll set some stuff up. That's sort of the way it works in India. Like, it's very much it's led with feeling, it's led with the heart. On another occasion, I had a meeting with a guy who, I asked him in the meeting, I said, do you want to see my book? And he said, no. He said, I just want to see if you're sincere. That was it. And I was, and that's the thing. You go there, and if you are sincere, if you go there just as a foreigner who's looking to, not really shoot as an outsider and treat it that way, it doesn't. I think we've seen a lot of that. And my feeling was, and I'm not patting myself on the back. I was really sincere about wanting to know what the actor's life was like, and that was my wholehearted approach in conversations, in shooting, in interviews with the actors.
What's amazing about the story and how it's just manifested in this really sort of beautiful book is that, going in, you didn't have a lot of knowledge about the Indian film industry, right?
Oh man, nope.
But what you just said, it was the sincerity of your curiosity helps sort of gain entry into a world that most people would think it would be very difficult to get access to. And then you discovered how different it is from the world that you had left behind here in the States compared to Hollywood.
Yeah.
So tell me about sort of having to sort of discover on the fly and learn on the fly how everything sort of worked there.
Well, what happened was on that first trip, I guess what I had in mind was the layout of the book, or the blueprint of the book, was like Lauren Greenfeld's Girl Culture.
Mm-hmm, yeah. So
that's kind of what I had in mind. And I thought, if I were to get every branch of the tree of the acting community, that would be a really cool thing. And in the first, that first trip, it was only about a week there that I was shooting, and I met probably about 20 actors. So when I went back, I went back to the States after that first trip, sort of to regroup and think like, well, what is this? Is this just going to be an article? Is it going to be, I don't know what it was going to be. But the person who was taking me around Bombay to introduce me to actors is a woman named Guneet Munga, and she is a film producer. She produced this film a couple years ago called Lunchbox. She's done a number of films, but she's a fantastic human being. And so she came out and stayed with me in LA for a couple of weeks, and she was just saying, you really should come back and consider doing a book and all of this stuff. And when I eventually did, about 8 months later, go back to Bombay. So this would have been in the latter part of 2010. And as soon as I got back, I met with another new friend of mine, and I said, put together a list of all the different names. Give me great, juicy list of, totally diverse mix of actors. Theater people, one-hit wonders, old-timers, yesteryear stars, beginners, you name it. He did that. And I didn't recognize a single name on the list. Not one, except for Shah Rukh Khan, who's a massive star, and Salman. Anyway, so I that's when the whole thing just hit me. Like, here I was prepared to stay for 2 months in India, and I had no idea. I literally felt like I was at the base of Mount Everest, and I had forgotten to get a backpack or water or trail mix or anything. Like, I had no idea. I just was all heart, and I had no idea what was in front of me. So that's when the process started of every day looking up theater families, acting dynasties, like the Kapoor family. I mean, there's so many of them, and watching Bollywood films, because at that point I'd watched maybe 5 or 10 Bollywood films at the most. So I really immersed myself in the study of Bollywood, the history of their acting community.
And from reading the essay at the beginning of the book, what was a completely new discovery for me was how stardom works in India. And how it is, as you just said, familial. That there are basically like dynasties of families where your generation after generation, regardless of whether or not they're quote unquote talented or not, still find themselves being stars in the industry. And I think most importantly is the way they are seen within the culture. Because it's not just, there's a movie star that we admire and, that we read about in the magazines. People here literally feel like that they're part of the family. I mean, they're so ingrained into the culture that I was reading when, in the essay about when people fall ill, that you will see hundreds, not thousands of people out there praying for a person that they don't even know, and doing it publicly.
Yeah, that's
fascinating.
Right. We really don't. And I think that's the part of the culture that we just can't even imagine here. I mean, here, Tom Cruise or whoever, Tom Hanks will go out and have lunch and people walk by and they don't even bother him. Mm-hmm. And there, it's just not possible for stars to leave the house without, hundreds of people following them around, because, they're very much a culture that they're a worshiping culture. They have so many gods. Yeah. And that falls into that part of the psyche where, these actors are not just actors. Many times they're considered gods, and there are temples built for them. And now that's not true for every actor, but I mean, some of the big ones, that's the case. And as you described, there are people that wait out in front of the hospital. I mean, just even in front of Salman Khan's house or Shah Rukh's house in Bandra. I mean, you go there any time of the day, and there are 20 to 40 to 50 to 100 people standing out, just staring up at the balcony, just waiting for him to come out. Wow. Any time of the day. We don't have anything like that here.
But I think it's kind of fascinating understanding that, and then looking at your photographs, which show these people in very sort of ordinary circumstances where they're not glamorized. So to us, that looks relatively normal, but I'm sure to the audiences and the people in India, when they see these photographs, it must be quite jarring to see their stars in ways that they never see them outside of the screen.
Absolutely. I feel the same way. I look at the book and I go, well, a lot of these are just ordinary shots. But in the context, like when you contextualize it, it is absolutely the people that I've shown this book to in India, they cannot believe when they see a photograph of Hema Malini. She has never been seen wearing anything other than a sari. And here she is in jeans and a T-shirt watering her plants. I mean, it's just shocking. And to us, we look at the photograph and go, oh, okay. But it's a big deal there. And that's been sort of the feedback across the board is that, wow, you really capture the way these people look, because the only way they've seen most of the stars is on the red carpet or these glammed up shots. And I mean, really, really some cheesy glammed up shots of people, suntan lotion and sunglasses and very.
Did you find, because you photograph of a wide variety of people at different levels of achievement and stardom in India?
Yep.
It isn't just the big stars, even though you have a number of huge stars in there. But did you find that with the people who were more known, that they were as protective as we imagine the stars here to be, of how they're perceived and how they're shot and how they're looked at? Or did you find that there was a sort of different attitude that they had to being revealed in the photographs that you were making?
I would say yes and no. I think for the most part, yeah, they were. I'm trying to think if there was anyone that wasn't. At that level, there's such a high level of vanity, I think, just due to the nature of the business. There were a number of female stars that I had to reshoot because they didn't approve of the shot, the first time around, which, I and everyone else thought it was a good shot, but they thought they, looked this way or that way. So and then there were other instances of, competition where one shot, the frame, the actress is smaller in the frame than her main competitor, who's larger, who has a shot where she takes up more space of the frame. So little things like that, that sort of came into play sometimes. It
was really interesting in reading the essay about the attitude they have to their image, not just in terms of how they look in photographs, but how they look on screen. That the director who wrote the introduction to the book was talking about that rather than sitting down there and going over their lines or going over their characterizations, they're looking in a mirror, because so much of how they see and how they actually probably are weighted in terms of their persona and their achievements as an actor has so much to do with how they're going to look, and less so to some extent in terms of their abilities as actors.
Yeah, it's different. They're also in the sense that the star completely has the power of the set. They will wait on stars to show up. Sometimes a star will not come out of their dressing room for 3 or 4 hours. They'll keep people waiting. Don't know why. They just do. Sometimes. There's a lot of politics that happens. In fact, I had to wait myself. Not just. I'm just using myself as an example. When I was going to meet people, there were times that I was made to wait for many hours, just because I don't know why.
Yeah.
And that sort of comes into play there on a set. So it's many times it's less of the director that has control of the set, and it's more of the star. Just in the what's happening politically, just in that social dynamic. Just to go back to the question of the vanity, like literally before every take. It's not just before every scene; it's before every single take of every scene. They're not looking at their script. Their hair and makeup person does final touches, and then they have a mirror that they put right in front of them, and then they themselves do their final touches, and then they can start. So again, it's like they are sort of controlling the pace of the filming.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did your experience as an actor and your own experience in film and in television and theater help you at all in terms of being able to negotiate this world, or did that not mean anything at all?
I think it does. I think it does. Going into some situations where, let's say, there's situations where you're nervous, which can happen from time to time. Meeting. I hung out with Salman Khan for 2 days, and just meeting him. And now I don't have a history of seeing him on screen. I'd seen a couple of films, but I mean, this is a big. Not only is he a mega star, but he has people surrounding him that are, they're guys with machine guns.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a big deal. And when I first met him, he was sitting at a table with Shatrughan Sinha, and who is a old-time, yesteryear star, now politician. They're sitting at this long table, and it's as if it were lunchtime or just post-lunchtime. They're sitting there quietly, and across from them is this row of family or people, friends, but everyone's sitting there quietly. And when I mean quiet, I mean nobody's talking at all. And this is a cultural thing where that just happens. There's lots of moments of silence. And so I arrived, and I was just quiet finally, after about 2 minutes, somebody asked me a question, and I sort of said, but here I am standing, sort of like I was at the foot of the king is up on his seat, and I'm presented to the king. I think dealing with those situations, having had been an actor and had done numerous performances of plays in front of hundreds of people, or even gone to going to final callbacks on a TV show where it's you against another person, and you're in front of the director and 15 producers, or 5 producers and a casting director. Anyways, this level of anxiety. That, dealing with that, I think that's where it comes into play most. And also, quite frankly, just sometimes acting like you know what you're doing when you kind of don't. That certainly comes into play. I don't know if that has to do with acting or more just, getting older and being more comfortable with yourself and knowing that things will work out however it shakes down.
How did the project evolve as you started to not only learn more about the film industry, but as you got to know different people who would reveal different aspects of the dynamics that make that whole industry work, from the person doing the very basic thing like fishing coffee or moving scripts to like the top directors and actors and everything in between. How did what you learned from them help to refine the idea that you initially had led you to create the project?
Right. Well, there was sort of a clear demarcation around halfway through the project, I'd say, in retrospect, where I was starting to get some traction, or the project was starting to get some traction. I had, met this woman, Manjarii Sharma, who's the casting director at Yash Raj Films. So she, it was a huge boon coming in contact with her. She knows everyone. She's from a film family, and she really took a liking to the project and to me as a photographer. And that was just, she was able to pick up the phone and put me in contact with people that I just, at a certain point, I couldn't go any further, so to speak. And as I was coming in contact with bigger stars, it suddenly became almost a project of like who's who in the star in that world, mm-hmm. like trying to get more and more and more and more stars. And I kept on reminding myself and then telling everyone, like, this is not a project about stars. I want to capture every branch of the tree. It's almost an anthropological project where I want to represent the community in its totality, not just have it be a star. I mean, I absolutely didn't want it to be a star project. Having the person, and that's something I very much feel, deeply in all of my work, is that I want the person who has, a couple of lines, or, the person who is just getting started, their story is as relevant as, the person who's been doing it for 20 years. Now, obviously, they're not comparable in their craftsmanship, but as human beings, their stories are just as valid.
Did you feel like the fact that you weren't familiar with these people's bodies of work, and that they weren't these sort of celebrities in your own mind, sort of helped you sort of bridge the gap, as opposed to if you had been here and then you're in front of Julia Roberts or Tom Hanks, that all of a sudden, just because of the history that they have in your own life, that somehow that would have been a deterrent to you being able to get what you needed?
Absolutely. And that's what I mean. Like meeting Salman, to me, I had seen him in a couple of films, and, I was relating to him as really, when I met him, within the first few minutes of our talking, it just absolutely felt like we were just guys that went to high school. He was just one of the guys I knew at high school, mm-hmm. who just happened to win the lottery, and, he's a great guy, but literally just won the lottery, and he's still the same guy, and a normal guy too. And now that also has gotten me some flack in my, in some of my representations of people as quote unquote normal. I've gotten some flack in some of the images from, Indians that this is not, how can you make, Salman is like a god. How can you make him look like just a normal guy? Mm. But to go back to your question, I absolutely 100% think my coming as an outsider gave me a lead in to approach. I also, just in terms of getting the access that I did, I think it 100%, and I was told several times that an Indian photographer could not have gotten the access that I did. I think because I was a foreigner and because I was, Shanu was helping me, but many times it was because I was a foreigner that I was getting access to people that I wouldn't normally. And then just in terms of, just the vibe in the room, I'm just looking at I'm sitting with Dharmendra, who's a mega, he's been a mega star for 50 years, like 50 years, a mega star. And here I am just sitting with him, and he's just so lovely and wonderful. And it's not like he's a grandfather figure, but I don't know, he's just a guy. I'm just looking into his eyes, and he's looking at me. And actually, when I went back to get his release, and that's a whole nother topic, but when I had to go back and get his release, he had me read to him, the excerpt that, the long, the quote that I gave him. And as I was reading it to him, I started crying. And it's just me and him sitting in there in the room. He starts crying. It was just a beautiful moment. He reached out and he touched my leg. And it was, this guy's a megastar. Wow. But he's just, just a guy.
Before we talk about America 2.0, I look at your site and I see that so much of what I see on that site is about these projects that you work on. Yep. And, I talk to a lot of photographers, and I see a lot of photographers who show their bodies of work, whether it's editorial or commercial or whatever it is. And they may work on some personal projects, but they seem to be sort of secondary to what they're doing. But it seems like for you, the project is really where you find your home as a photographer. Why is it so important to you?
I still make my living as a commercial photographer. I still, I do a lot of, and now I've met a lot of big photographers who sort of tell me in private that, they do, they do corporate gigs and stuff like that. You got to pay the bills.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's sort of that, like, in the back room, people will tell you. So a good part of my time is spent doing those gigs, which I enjoy and I do a good job at. To me, it's sort of like photography is sort of like surfing, and not that I've ever surfed, but the people that I know that are lifelong surfers, the way they describe catching a wave is every single time it's for the first time. No two waves are the same, and it's kind of like that with every single thing you're shooting, like trying to get the shot. So sort of having my life as a working guy, and then having these projects, which also facilitates work, it just seems to be more of a creative voice, a more personal voice, a more active voice. I'm not just working for hire. This is my, the things that I'm really interested in.
Yeah. Well, tell us about America 2.0. For people who have not seen the images, what is the project about, and how did it come about?
This came about with, it sort of started in my mind about a year ago with all of that, Trump Muslim rhetoric. This whole election year for everyone has been so just really disturbing in many ways. With a lot of that rhetoric, I started thinking about what could I do that could contribute to the Muslim anxiety. How could, if I could do anything, how could I do it, and could I do it in a positive way? I started thinking about a project that was going to be like an art project, quote unquote art project, that would be faux ads, an ad for Reebok or Pepsi or whatever, that would have an all Muslim cast, and then maybe a few other people, but mostly Muslim cast. As I was starting to come in contact with some people in that community, I started taking portraits. I thought in the meantime, while I figure out actually the legalities of doing a project like that, maybe I could just take some portraits. So I just did it really, on a simple gray background. And, I'm a huge fan of Irving Penn and the Brady from the early days. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, let me just do it in my studio and just do all natural light and just put up a gray background and sort of let the subject sort of stand out in sharp relief there. So the people I was coming in, and also the people I just happened, again, through serendipity, and I think this is always sort of a case with artistic projects, is you sort of put one foot forward and then see what other foot comes out to meet you. I was sort of putting this forward, and then what came to meet me was Muslim youth. Because of the people that I was put in contact with, I came in contact with this young woman who was the president of the Muslim Student Association at Brooklyn Technical High School. And so here I was presented with Muslim youth. I thought, okay, well, that's now we're dealing with first-time voters. That's interesting. So that started a narrative with them that became more political, and yet at the same time, I really wanted to capture everyday life. And not, and the way to do that, since I wasn't not going to be shooting environmentally, since I was in the studio, then I thought, let me substantiate this with their own stories. And so that became this, this robust dialogue of, just asking them about school and what they wanted to do and favorite bands and dating and gossip and, sports and you name it. Yeah. So that was just sort of like a way in on a very sort of just a real normal level.
Yeah, I think, and that's what I really liked about the project and what was so refreshing was reading their words beneath the photographs, because as some of your subjects said themselves, that they don't want to be judged by the wrap that they're wearing over their head, or because of their or whatever clothing they're wearing, or and it was just like hearing them in the words talking about what they're interested in and what they're studying really goes a long way to sort of going beyond the visual and really humanizing them in a beautiful way.
That's right, and it really normalizes that dialogue, that narrative. And they're under, I believe, they're under a lot of pressure. And ultimately, somebody recently asked, this thing has gotten so much traction. And somebody in an interview yesterday was saying, well, what do you want to get out of this? And I was saying, I just want people to see people, period. Mm-hmm. I don't want them to see a scarf. I want them to see a person. I want them. And when you look at the photographs, and what I hope happens is you see someone that you go, oh, that looks like my daughter's friend on the soccer team, or that looks like a young girl at church, or that looks like one of the kids, down the street. And then in that way, you start to see yourself. When you change the dialogue of familiarity, it brings everything closer. Things are not so far apart.
How did the work that you did with the film industry and the Indian film industry book and interacting with all those people help you when it came to this one? How did you sort of evolve and change as a result of that work into this one?
Well, I think pushing myself, first of all, to shoot. I really do like to shoot because I really still feel like, even though I've been doing this full time for 13 years, I really feel like I'm still just starting in many ways. And that's a great thing. I still feel like I'm still learning. I'm still like a student in many ways. And so I wanted to, if I couldn't rely on having the environment tell the story, then having the narrative tell, having the caption imbibe their photograph. I think that was the connection, is because with Living the Dream, that was the first time I had ever interviewed people. I'd never done it before. I mean, I'd take, I was a photographer, I'd take photographs and that's it. But here I was sitting down with people for sometimes hours on end, asking them all these questions. So I was that was a huge learning curve for me too. How do you dig and how do you get an answer if you're not quite getting the answer you want, or
Right.
want to lead into something? How can you try it a little bit this way and try it a little bit that way, and it sort of moves on this rotation, and so I brought that with me to this project of interviewing people.
What's interesting about both of these projects is that the viewers who see these, be they the people in India who see these books of these actors, or people in this country who see these pictures of Muslims, it's almost guaranteed to evoke some very strong reactions, some of which you probably could not have anticipated. How does that sort of fit into your experience of the work through other people's eyes?
For instance, with the Bollywood book, I feel like many times I was, or most of the time I was on target, getting the people how I really felt they really looked. And then some of the backlash to that was that, well, you're, destroying our image of this person because he looks like a normal guy or she looks like a normal girl. With this project, it's been across the board positive. I've had some people in the Muslim community reach out to me and say, thank you very much for doing this. At the same time, we feel like you have not fully represented us in the sense that you have only gotten, South Asian and Arab Muslims, and there are no, white or black Muslims in this project. And I have said these. First of all, it's a work in progress. It's not finished, and second of all, I've only come in contact with, the people that I've come in contact, they have turned me on to their family and friends, and so the circle has been relatively small, and so I'm trying to diversify within the community, and so I'm just reassuring everyone that it actually is happening. And in fact, this Saturday I've got 17 more shoots.
But
over the weekend.
But with this latest project, how's the fact that you're already, even before you finished it, you're getting press, you're getting attention, you're getting feedback, both positive and sometimes negative.
Yeah.
Usually when you produce something, it's not until you're finished. But now you're still in the middle of it. How does it color how you approach it? Not just in terms of how you shoot it, but maybe how you put it out there, the work that you've done thus far?
Just in terms of that it's come through just in terms of diversifying the project, and also, people said, why don't you have some, young folks, millennials in uniform, let's say, why don't you just try to, visually diversify it? That's been the biggest takeaway.
One of the shots that I really love is a woman who's sort of dressed in sort of a mishmash thing. She has her head wrap, and then she has a cap on top as well.
Yeah.
And I just love that, because I think that really speaks to the whole idea of these are just people. They're not just this homogenous group. And here's a woman that is a reflection not only of her religion, but just being an American.
That's right.
And to see that embodied in a single photograph, I thought was just really, really nice.
Yeah, thank you. Those girls I saw on the PATH train. My wife and I live in Jersey City, and I saw these girls on the PATH train coming home. And when I saw the backwards hat, I just, my eyes lit up. Because actually at that point, I remember I was sort of feeling a little like, this project is not going to work out, and people are not responding. Like even in terms of just getting subjects to photograph, there are always ebbs and flows in whatever project, any given project. So I saw them on the train, and that was just, I gave them my card. I told them what I was doing. I showed them a few photographs. They got excited, and then a few days later they called, and then we set up the shoot. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to meet up with them again. Some former students of mine at Newhouse are coming here to do a documentary film on this, on America 2.0 and the making of. And so we're going to hang out with those girls tomorrow. They have an some aerial class, acrobatic, something class. So anyway, so we're going to see them again, and they're just couldn't be more cool. Earlier
when we were talking about the Living the Dream book, you touched on the whole thing about releases, and it sounded that there was a story there in terms of getting releases from the subjects in the book. Tell us about that.
Well, I now know. I was under the impression for a long time that you really only needed, for a book like that, for a documentary book, you really only needed the release for the front and the back cover. That was actually, sold the book, and that's why you needed the release. And everything else inside was considered either documentary or editorial or art or this, that, and the other. So a few weeks ago, HarperCollins, who is publishing the book, one of their lawyers, said right sort of in the 11th hour, well, we need releases for everyone. Now, I have releases for almost everyone, but there are a few people that either I didn't get because it was right early on, and it was somebody that they're not famous, and they gave me they knew why everyone in the book knows why I met them. Like that was why I was meeting them, because I told them I was doing this book and all of this stuff. And then there were a few big stars who, they said, I gave them the release, and they said, yes, we'll have my assistant will get it to you. And then that never happened. So there was this hold off, and I've had to go back, and some of these people I have not spoken to in years. So getting back in touch with some of these people was incredibly difficult.
And especially at the 11th hour, I can only imagine the anxiety.
Oh, literally, we were about to go to print, like on a Tuesday, and it was Monday. This person said, wait. I said, what? Why didn't you tell me this, 6 months ago or a year ago? So anyway, that happens, and now I will get releases from everyone for everything.
Well, that's interesting, because that's something I didn't know, especially when it came to sort of a documentary project. I just assumed the same thing.
That's right. That's what I had always heard. And it may well still be true. This may just be a lawyer wanting to cover themselves or cover, their client.
Or that particular publisher.
That particular publisher. It could be, but it really sort of made me, it scared me so much. I thought, I'll never let this, happen again. I will just carry, releases in every pocket from now on.
Well, you talk about how you do a lot of commercial work, you do your personal projects, and oftentimes that is a real challenge for a photographer because much of their career is involved with sort of making work that actually earns them a living. And the personal work sort of is something they may have a desire to do at some point, but they're so caught up in doing their, the work that it doesn't happen, and then they lose their passion for photography. So how do you manage to do that, or you're able to dedicate, a good amount of time to these projects that still ensure that you're able to keep a roof over your head?
There's sort of a meter inside that, sort of goes off at a certain point. And I think that was, going into, like when I first did this first project, the Foot Book, I had just gone back to school for photojournalism, like really fully. So I found myself I had to make time for it because up until that point I was basically a headshot photographer, for either corporate stuff or actors or writers or whatever. But I was doing that very full time. I was very busy. So I found myself just making time to do this other thing. And then, once the Foot Book I felt was sort of finished, that's when the actor thing started, but that wasn't quite clicking. And so that's when I really thought I need to absolutely immerse myself. I can't just keep doing headshots. I can't just, whether it's headshots or corporate work or whatever it is, it's work for hire. Mm-hmm. And it's not my, at a certain point, I almost felt like as an actor, there was a certain point where I also lost that interest too, because I was saying somebody else's lines and somebody was telling me where to stand and, when to say those lines. You don't have a lot of, other than the rehearsal process, there's not a lot of creativity there. And so that feeling came back a little bit. And that's why I just continue to push myself. And also, now I feel like I'm in a different place where I feel like my wife is an anthropologist, and the way she and I talk about, she and I started a project earlier in the year called the Rainbow Ladies. We're meeting women in Trinidad and Tobago, which is where she's been doing research for the year. So it's this feeling of these projects are important. If I can, do enough and make enough to cover, us so that we're, comfortable, then I can put as much time as I want into these other projects. And so I just do, instead of, trying to come up with, somebody asked me, a former student asked me a few weeks ago, like he wanted to start a project and he was saying, well, how should I start it? What should I do? And I was just saying, start simple, but start it. The most important thing is absolutely start it. He was just sort of talking as if he were just waiting for the perfect, moment to start, as opposed to just starting and then letting it shape itself. That's
awesome advice. Well, my last question that I ask each guest is that I ask them to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover and explore, and it can be anyone. Someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that photographer be and why?
Right off the top of my head, I would say Manjarii Sharma. She is a friend, and she is an absolute poet with a camera. She started a project, and she's pretty well known in many circles. She did a project a couple years ago, a shower project, where she was photographing people.
Yes. I remember her. Yeah, fantastic work.
Yeah, in her shower. She's also done a beautiful 4x5 project on Indian gods. She's from Bombay. I really am inspired by her passion and her dedication to the craft and the poetry of finding, her way in the world as an artist. So she would definitely be, somebody that I think your listeners would really enjoy listening to and would get a lot from as an artist.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed having a chance to talk with you.
It really, truly, I'm flattered and I'm honored that you invited me.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Mark for joining us here at The Candid Frame. You can find out more about Mark and his work by visiting markbennington.com. Thank you for your continued support of The Candid Frame. If you haven't already, please take the time today to write a review in the iTunes Store. Your ratings and comments help people to discover the great conversations like the one you heard today. You can also support the show by making a regular monthly contribution through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/The Candid Frame, or you'll find a link in the show notes and the Candid Frame website. Or if you just want to make a one-time contribution to the show, you can do so via PayPal. Thanks to all of you who've recently contributed to the show, including Michelle Elkins, Susan Rosenberg, and Tom Spadek. You're helping us to make TCF even better. To access our complete archive of interviews, download the free Candid Frame app, available for Apple iOS, Android, and Windows. Links for each can be found in the show notes and the website at thecandidframe.com. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @IbadianX. Remember to help spread the word. And this is Ibadian X, and this is The Candid Frame.